Good evening, Spark Soul Learning community. My name is Percy Brown, and I will be the presenter this evening for Will My White Brothers and Sisters Have the Courage to Stay Awake Long Enough? I'll go right into the mix of my presentation, but I'd like to speak a little bit about this man right here, John Brown, abolitionist, led the raid on Harper's Ferry, was one who was committed to the racial equality for Black Americans, and he put his life on the line and actually lost his life for the pursuit and fight for racial equality for Black Americans, which I think is really important for this conversation that I'll be having with you all this evening. So I will go ahead and share my screen. All right. And present mode. All right, here we go. Building the beloved community. This is really the writings and the work and philosophy of Dr. King towards the end of his life. He was starting to evolve beyond just looking at racial equality for Black Americans, but began to look at it in terms of a global vision to end hunger, poverty, homelessness, and ending all forms of discrimination globally, so that all human beings will be able to participate and share in the wealth of the earth. So this will be the foundation for my presentation. But based on my description, I did say that I was going to share a bit about Freedom Summer to really offer my white brothers and sisters encouragement in terms of really being committed to this fight for racial justice. So I have a picture here of my father, Percy Brown Sr. I think this picture is in 1975. And this is when he received his bachelor's degree from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And of course, that's me when I was a little bit past 1 year old. But the reason why I have this picture in the space is because my dad actually found his way to UW-Madison because of Freedom Riders. There were about 5 or 6 white college students from UW-Madison that were trained to go into the Deep South and help the Black community with voter registration and healthcare programs. So those college students actually stayed with my family, and for the first time, my father, really befriended and had genuine and positive relationships with white folks. So that really inspired him to apply to UW-Madison. He made his way there on the back of a U-Haul truck with one suitcase, because the Deep South, because of racial discrimination, really created impoverished conditions in which my father grew up. So that courage right there, where those white folks were willing to put their lives on the line, and even John Brown, right? And that's what I want to put into the space today, because this fight for racial justice will require stamina, but most importantly, it will require perspective and knowledge. My father, was the first Black male to integrate Rosedale Consolidated High School in Rosedale, Mississippi, in the 1960s. In his junior year, the day after Dr. King was assassinated, April 4th, 1968, he walked into the all-white classroom, and on the blackboard it said, "I'm glad that nigger's dead." And the teacher kept it up there all day. And I just wanted to lay that in the space today, because I want to go back to 1968. And what you see right here is the Kerner Commission, which was commissioned by President Johnson in 1968, given all that was happening in the nation post-assassination of Dr. King. I mean, urban environments or urban cities and the nation was engaging in massive civil disorder. Cities were literally on fire. And today is a snapshot of what was happening in 1968. But unfortunately, I think we're finding ourselves right here in this space again. So I want to offer this to really offer context. So this commission really was studying civil disorders that was taking place in the country in 1968. And the report famously concluded that our nation is moving toward 2 societies, one Black, one white, separate and unequal, and argued without dramatic action, the nation would see a continuing polarization of the American community and ultimately the destruction of basic democratic values. Where are we at today when we think about our government? The Republicans and Democrats are extremely polarized. They can't seem to find common ground on issues of racial injustice, on issues of COVID, and it seems as if the American people are digging their heels in and taking their positions on these two particular issues based on their political beliefs or ideology. And unfortunately, we're really going to have to step away from that as American people and approach these issues from a humanitarian perspective. If we really want to confront and ensure that our basic democratic values are not destroyed. But this idea of if the nation didn't do something dramatically to deal with what we were seeing around racial injustice, that there would eventually be one black, one white nation. In America, I think through a symbolic effort in 2008 in the election of President Obama, had a lot of Americans thinking we had arrived, but the issue of race is so deep. I will respectfully push back on part of this report and say that America already was a separate nation, one black and one white. And it really starts here. It was the mid-1700s when European scientists such as Johann Blumenbach, Carolus Linnaeus, and Petrus Camper began to study the human family, and within that started creating a racial hierarchy in terms of within the human family, there would be a superior species and an inferior species. And obviously, if that science was coming out of Europe, it would be the European that would be the most superior, most closest to God. And then obviously with the Negro, based on his visual, was making us the most inferior out of the human family. And this science began to take shape in the United States of America, as evidenced in some of our founding fathers. Here's Thomas Jefferson, quote, "I advanced it, therefore, as a suspicion only, that the blacks, whether originally a distinct race or made distinct by circumstance, are inferior to the whites in the endowments of both body and mind." President Jefferson inked the famous document, the Declaration of Independence, in which he said all men are created equal, and that it was a God-given right to the pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Unfortunately, there was some hypocrisy in this document, especially given his position on how he perceived blacks. Even Abraham Lincoln, the U.S. Constitution, supported Thomas Jefferson's ideology with 3/5 compromise, which relegated Black Americans to no more than 3/5 of a person. That was really a political number. But even during that time period, we were nothing more than chattel property or perceived as nothing more than an animal. Again, right here, Abraham Lincoln reinforcing some of the science that I showed you a couple of slides back in the visual. "I have no purpose to introduce political and social equality between the white and black races. There's physical difference between the two, which in my judgment will probably forever forbid their living together upon the equal footing of perfect equality." So again, this idea that race is biological, and that if folks are of African descent, they were of the most inferior part of the human family is quite evident, again, with our president, although he abolished involuntary servitude with the ratification of the 13th Amendment. But this science would, again, begin to be baked in the United States of America in terms of its frame of reference around human beings. The Great Chain of Being, which is the science that had the name when it was actually, taking part in the mid-1700s, evolved into what we would call eugenics. And eugenics historically encouraged people of so-called healthy, superior stock to reproduce and discourage the reproduction of the mentally challenged or anyone who fell outside the social norm. Again, if you think about what President Jefferson said, what President Lincoln said, and even Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896, when the U.S. Supreme Court said that separate but equal, obviously Black Americans would fall into this category of falling outside the social norm. Eugenics was popular in America much of the first half of the 20th century, yet it earned its negative association mainly from Adolf Hitler's obsessive attempts to create a superior Aryan race. So although Adolf Hitler has been painted as demonic and evil, he did take a lot of his work and learn from what the United States of America had embedded socially, politically, and economically in terms of the rights and privileges of certain groups of people or human beings based on skin color and physical characteristics. So as we think about race, I'm laying out the science of it all, and it is really baked into everything that we know as America. But we really have to start to deconstruct that and really look at race in America in terms of privileges and rights that have been afforded to certain groups of people based on this racial hierarchy. Policy legislation is evident in this nation, whether it's at the federal level, to the state or local level, but also I'm showing you how it is played out scientifically. This, what you have right here, is the white man's Bible. It was written in 1981 by Ben Claassen. Ben Claassen sat in the Florida State Assembly and also has some unsuccessful runs at the U.S. Senate coming out of Florida. But I think this is the language or the literature that white nationalists and neo-Nazis use today. Like I said, this book was written in the late 20th century. And as you can see, this is the description of Black Americans for those who have the mindset of white nationalism or neo-Nazism. Among all these races, the Black niggers of Africa are undoubtedly at the lowest scale of the latter, dubiously called the human race. We of the Church of the Creator disclaim any common racial denominator with the niggers, the same as we do regard monkeys. Think about the science. We regard them as either subhuman or humanoid and recognize them as being closer to the animal kingdom than any species of humanity, as exemplified by the white race. You know, unfortunately, this is baked, right? So I'm showing you how it has played out scientifically. I have shown you or have given you examples of how it's played out in terms of policy and legislation, but I want to give you
the way
an
it looked
example
out at Martin Luther King Jr.
of how it plays out in the media.
The way it looked out at Martin Luther King Jr. Park. Martin Luther King.
The fired weatherman accused of using a racial slur on air is defending himself.
You wonder how this happened? Well, the answer is quite clear. Cartoons portrayed certain people as dummies we should fear. When children watch these defamations, hurt was normalized. Here's a disembodied voice that drops some knowledge that is wise.
Cartoons from the golden age are a stained historic page, especially for the character known as Coon. Oh, lazy, scared, clothes are torn. Tom and Jerry racist porn. The melodies weren't merry for me and you. There were emotional castrations passed down through generations. I'm talking about that racist BS thorn in my side every time I'm at a picnic, stereotype about watermelons and swimming. A brother can't have some watermelon and jump in the water without someone looking at him. Why do you think children thought we were buffoons? The question was rhetorical. It's from those cartoons. A trimmer like Martin gone too soon. Tell me, would you really call Martin Luther King a coon? A few decades later, equality got greater, but boy, you moved real damn slow. Bigotry was less on the surface, but oh boy, it was very deep low.
When a black cat started on ABC, it was a new kind of minstrel show.
Same old, baby.
On Jemima still look like Mary and Double cool like Crow.
Seriously, the crow's name is Jim.
The little cartoons cost so much to look. The little cartoons, I watch it back and forth. See like Martin goes to see. Tell me, would you really call Martin Luther King
A coon? You think this is normal? Of course you do. We're talking about imagery as mind control. Barack Obama, watermelon, we know felons sound familiar? It's just a cartoon. Jaja Binks broken in his dumb demeanor, slouch walk, sound familiar? It's just a cartoon. Prada chains, Gucci sweaters, Prada, Gucci, Prada. I give up. It's just a cartoon. Look at me, what you see, telling me on TV, come on now. It's just a cartoon. I think you gotta face it, is it really racist? Oh, I just pretended, are you so offended? With this image poison on your minds, you don't mind, are you blind? You keep your racism alive.
Go. Oh, it's all the way back to the first slide. So the media has definitely baked this image and this perception of Black Americans into the minds of all Americans. And again, even the most celebrated basketball player on the planet today, LeBron James, on the cover of a magazine with a pretty white woman. But in terms of perception, the media, using a celebrated Black American and portraying an image that can easily be associated with the movie King Kong that came out. So basically comparing LeBron James to nothing more than a gorilla. But this really leads into the work that is required moving forward. As you can see, Dr. King, justice too long delayed is justice denied. But on a broader scale, especially in terms of what we've been seeing today, Dr. King did talk about man's inhumanity to man. And that man's inhumanity to man has been the plight and the experience of Black Americans now for 401 years. The first ship of enslaved Africans arrived in Jamestown, Virginia in August 1619. We reached the 400-year mark of that just last year, and we are in year 401. And the nation now has exploded. And this issue of justice too long delayed is justice denied is real. And that's what we'll continue to talk about once we go live. So I'm really looking forward to that. I hope I stayed within my 20 minutes, but let's keep it rolling, my brothers and sisters. Thank you.